I want to share, I like to tell stories, and sometimes they get wordy, whatever, but I'll try to keep them concise for you. But there's a number of stories that I want to share today that really dig in to what we're going to talk about today, and it's a churchy word, I think. It's called redemption, or being redeemed. And to me, that has always seemed like this big word that I could never really grasp what that meant. I mean, I can look it up in the dictionary, right? We can all do that. But I struggled to make it personal. And so by seeing stories, and that's how Jesus taught, through stories, and that's how it impacted, and his culture, they shared through stories. Everything was not concrete, black and white. So we're going to review some stories and see if we can figure out what redemption is and what it means to be redeemed. And if I look at the Hebrew word for redeemed, it includes saved, which is what we think of as modern-day Christians. We think of being saved and our Savior and all of that. But redemption is not something that only God does. In the saved sense, in the forgiveness sense of Jesus Christ dying for our sins, that's a God thing. And only God can make us his bride. And there's a whole lot to this message today that builds on background and all kinds of other things that I'd be happy to share another day, but you don't want to be here until dinner time, until supper time. So we're just, as far as God making us a bride, there's a whole big section and study on that. But we have a role. We are called to also be redemptive in our communities and our families, and we're called to participate in that. And so I want to talk about that and what that looks like and what that means, and see if we can make some sense of that. To start with that, I want to take you back to this guy named Abraham. And he's mentioned first time in the Old Testament as Abram, and so I might use that name interchangeably, Abram, Abraham. Excuse me, wet my whistle. So I want to kind of discuss what a patriarch is. Abraham came from a very patriarchal society. That's the culture. That was how they dealt with. So to explain what a patriarch is usually the oldest capable male in the family. He controls all assets of the family. So how many of you, like I had the grandma in my family was kind of like, she told everyone, okay, guys, it's time to get the chairs out for the Thanksgiving dinner. You're going to bring the mashed potatoes. You're bringing the turkey. And they were in control of all of that. And so in this society with Abraham, he was the patriarch of the family. He was the oldest, most capable male. He controlled all assets. So he also didn't just boss them around and tell them what to do. He controlled the land, the crops, the animals that they had. He took care of everybody with everything. He controlled absolutely everything for everyone that was in his family. His job was really to provide for his family. So he really had to make sure everybody was okay. Carrie, are you thirsty? Lynn, are you hungry? Cheryl's your tent leaking? We're going to make sure that everybody has all of their needs taken care of. I'm just going to make Dale fix it for you, but I'm going to check on you. So he controlled all of the assets for one purpose, and that was for the benefit of the family. The family was really, really important. And he wanted to make sure, again, that everyone was cared for. When the patriarch dies, the firstborn inherits absolutely everything. And that includes not just the stuff, but the responsibilities. So now you are in charge of taking care of all of the assets. You're in charge of taking care of everybody in your family, of all of their needs, everything you're in charge of. And the Bible, as we read through that, you'll see a little bit that changes over time. The firstborn still got the big chunk of what was passed down, but then it was kind of divided out to the other siblings. But for these families in a patriarchal society, and they still exist today, in the culture in Israel, Jerusalem, and there's people living way out that still live that way. The firstborn would get all of that, and the rest of the family was beyond pumped because they had an insurance policy. So, if Abraham dies, I'm still going to be good. My tent's not going to be leaky because I got somebody else to take care of me, and we can kind of live freely through that. The biggest mission outside of their daily care is that it's the patriarch's job to redeem a marginalized family member. So let's look at what that means. Marginalized means they're outside the family. They're somewhere else. They could be outside of the physical geographic area. Something could have happened to them. They could have been taken captive. There were people that were raiding different areas all the times and battles between tribes and all sorts of stuff. But they could be marginalized by being taken captive. So they were outside of their regular community. It could be by choice. If you remember the story of the prodigal son, he was done. He'd had enough. He was going to go explore the world and see what was going on. By choice, he left his community and his family and he went elsewhere. And they could also be marginalized maybe because they were sick and they just couldn't get back home. And so the patriarch's job was to do whatever he could to take the marginalized family members and bring them back into community and back into the family. So the word for redeemed is ga'al. Ga'al. And it's not really a religious word. It was more of a legal type term of these are the type of things that require redemption. And so Abraham, or a patriarch, would bring people back into the family because of this ga'al, and he would bring them back no matter what. And the fun part is, whatever it was that marginalized that family member, the patriarch was the one that took care of whatever it was in order to make sure they got back. So it could be a huge debt, it could be any of those other things. If they had been taken captive, they go get them and bring them back. And we're going to look into some stories here of how that actually works. So if you would, in your Bibles, go to Genesis 14 for me, very first book in your Bible. And as Tom says, if you didn't bring a Bible, there are some down below in the baskets that you are welcome to help yourself to. YouVersion is up, but I did not flag everything in YouVersion today. We're going with a simple message. That's your PowerPoint that you get today. Thank you, Chris. It's lovely. So Genesis chapter 14 is where we're headed, and we're going to look in verse 11. And so we're going to find out a little bit of the story between Abraham and Lot. Okay, so in verse 11 it says, "So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah." And back up a little bit. This is a battle of 4 kings against 5 kings. They've had their battle, and now they're basically splitting out the goods. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. So you now see that Lot is related to Abram. He's part of the family. He's been taken captive. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and of Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Habah, north of Damascus. And then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. And we'll stop there. So Abraham, again, was the patriarch. Lot, I don't know if you remember much about Lot. Lot was nothing but trouble. Lot was constantly causing problems. He was selfish. He wanted things that, they took him to a hillside, and he wanted the really good green stuff and left the junk for somebody else. So Lot was just very selfish in doing all of this. But it was Abraham's responsibility as the patriarch, whether he liked the guy or not. It was his responsibility to go back and bring him back. And so not only did he just send some guys out to get him, Abram went to get Lot and took his army of men, and he risked his life and their lives to go take care of Lot, the guy that nobody really respected so much. So in this idea of patriarch and how this works, they paid the debt that was in there. They freed him from bondage, and even if it used a lot of the family's resources, they would do whatever it took to bring that person back into community. And then he restores that person, not just to be on the fringe of the family or the community, he restores them back to full participation in the family and in the community. And so in a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how Love Inc. plays into that role. But that's kind of where we are. We try to bring the person back into the flock and help to restore them into the community. We seek the lost and we work to help bring them back to the church to restore them to that full position. We can't pay the debt to set sinners free. Again, that is paid for by Jesus Christ dying on the cross for us, for our sins. But Love Inc.'s role and the church's role is to bring them back into the church or into the family. And the thing that I picked up out of this message, too, was they didn't wait for Lot to straggle and find his way back in. Abraham dropped what he was doing, got a group of men together, headed off to do it. It was very active, and they were seeking. They put a lot of resources. You don't take 318 men out and, just let's go. There's food involved. There's military stuff. There's training. There's weapons. There's all sorts of things to be able to do that. So there was a lot of resources put into that. But we're called to actively go out and seek hurting people. For those of you that were at this week's Bible study, we talked about sheep. We talked about how wonderfully intelligent they are. Not really. So in the grand scheme of things, we're all like sheep, and sheep will not easily come back on their own. I watched a video recently. We talked about sheep like going off on their own, and if they stick their head in a fence, they'll pull a little bit to get out, and just because they feel a tiny little something on the back of their head, they'll just assume they're stuck. And they'll just stay there until someone might come and pull them out, or they just look after their own thing and they're not paying attention. So it's really easy for a sheep to wander off from the flock. In this video that I watched recently, there was a shepherd, and it was out in the middle of a desert, just like in the story in the Bible. The sheep had wandered off to the side, was eating grass, didn't pay attention where he was off by himself. The shepherd is way, way over, and he's calling for the sheep. And, you belt out. I don't know what they say to sheep, but they belt out, and the sheep, sometimes will come running, but most often they don't. And the shepherd had to actively walk all the way around. He's calling for the sheep, he's calling for it, and he literally gets far enough away from it to put his hand out to it, calls it, and the sheep finally comes to him. So it's an active process that happens, and when we see that about sheep in the Bible, that's the kind of thing it's talking about. We're lost sheep. So they aren't going to come back to us on their own. We do have to go out. As a patriarch and as a stranger with a patriarch, it was considered a great honor to be able to integrate a stranger into the family, someone who is not even on the fringes of the family. It was a huge deal. So, this is like talking about bringing people in from the street to have Thanksgiving dinner with you. It's something totally different. It's uncomfortable for some of us. But it was a great honor, and in their culture, that was normal. There was another video I watched where there was another guy that was out. He was a shepherd, might have been the same one, but he had packed everything. He was probably a young guy of maybe 19, 20, had everything for 3 days' meal in a little tiny bag, and it was probably like a flatbread type thing that he had, everything for 3 days. And this group of Americans came out to see what he was doing, and the tour guide said, kind of explained to everybody what was going to happen. And the guy, he was happy to see him. He went over to his donkey. He pulled open this bag that he had of food, opened it up, and I thought he was going to tear off just a little something to give them. He opened it up wide, gave them his entire meal, and shared it with all these Americans he had never, ever met before. You could look at the Americans and see that they were pretty well off, that they weren't starving. But this guy was going to be out in the desert for 3 days, and he gave his entire meal away to these people. So it's a great honor. It's still practiced today that we take care of strangers. We take care of those outside of our family. And so it's not just about feeding people and taking care of their immediate need, but it's about bringing them back in. And again, it was common, and it was a huge honor. So I want to talk about a couple more examples, a few more stories. If we go to Genesis 18, so we're just going to flip back just a couple of pages back farther. Genesis 18 talks about Abraham again, and it talks about Abraham welcoming 3 strangers. So Genesis 18, and we're going to start with verse 2. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and he bowed himself to the earth. And he said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, Do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham took to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. And then he set curds of milk and the calf that he had prepared, and he set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So again, he's got these 3 strange guys, and I don't know if he knew that that was God that came to him in that moment or not. There were 2 angels, is what the assumption has been made, is that 2 angels. The third one, there's an impression that it was God or Jesus. And I'm assuming it says in there, the Lord said. So there's conversation in there. But these are 3 strangers. These are 3 visitors that came to see him. The things that happened in there, there's a lot of action in that one little paragraph or 2 paragraphs that happened. And if we look at that, the stuff that he did was stuff that you don't just go to the pantry and find that stuff. He's living in a tent in the middle of the desert, and he's asking for flour. And the flour, I believe the interpretation, I want to say, is 50 to 80 pounds of flour. That's not go get a little lump and we're going to make one little pat of bread for them to do. They would have ground it up. They would have had to knead the process to bake. That's not like going through the drive-thru and getting your meal. From what I've heard, a historian that had looked at all this, he said that was basically like 3 days worth of baking that he had. This boy went out and did. They had to go slaughter the animal. They had to go prepare it. Historically, those animals, that type of ceremony, they would have only done like twice a year. And so for him to do that and create that offering for these strangers that had stopped by was huge. When they're doing milk and the curdled milk and all, it's a process. They are devoted to the strangers. It's not like I gave them the leftovers that I had. Like Emily's snacks the other day. She had something for musical, and I'm like, here's some extra applesauce, and here's some chips, and here you go. They didn't. They were very intentional about that. They went and they made it from scratch and took care of these strangers. So it was a huge, huge honor. So another story to go from there, another story, if we look in the New Testament. So we're flipping further back, and we're going to go to Matthew. And not only Matthew, but for those of you that are in Wednesday night Bible study, we're going to Matthew 9. We just finished that. If you have time on Wednesday nights, I will put a plug in. Please come out to Wednesday night Bible study. It's wonderful. So we're going to Matthew 9, and we're going to look at another story that starts in 9, verse 10. Let's see if I can find it here. This is a fun one. Now we're talking about Jesus, and we're talking about Jesus with strangers. And so it carries from Old Testament to New Testament of how we take care of strangers. Matthew 9, verse 10 says, While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And on hearing this, Jesus said, Is it not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick? But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. So Jesus is eating with sinners. He's being very active about what he's doing. They didn't all just come to him. He went to the sinners. He went to Matthew's house, and he is eating and working to integrate them back into community, even though it's not all spelled out that that's what's happening. But that's what Jesus was all about. Everywhere he went, he was intentionally working to bring the lost back to Christ, to bring him back to God. Okay? It's not just about the marginalized coming back to the family, but it's also about someone who is not yet in the family. So we have marginalized family members. It's strangers coming in. The meat and potatoes from today's lesson, we're going to talk about Ruth. So if you go back to your Old Testament, this is kind of like Wednesday nights. We do a lot of digging. It's not just in one verse out of the Bible. If we go to Ruth, and we're just going to highlight some of the story. It's a big story, and it's an awesome story to read sometime, and I just want to kind of summarize it for you. But if you remember Ruth and Naomi, so Naomi is the mother-in-law, right? And she has lost, if you look at chapter 1, just to kind of summarize, Naomi has lost her husband, her sons, and she has, I believe, 2 daughter-in-laws that are remaining. And they're pretty much left with nothing. And if we remember patriarchal society, her husband would have been in charge of their family. His property would have been passed down. Okay? She had no other family in there. She had nothing. Once her husband had passed away, she was left without anything. And so Naomi loses her husband and sons. Naomi and Ruth, her daughter-in-law, as we read through there, they return to Bethlehem. And as we go a little bit further let me see where it's at. She sends her one daughter-in-law. She decides that she will go away, but Ruth sticks it out. She's loyal. She sticks it out with Naomi. I'm going to be here. So it says something about Naomi. There's something admirable, something in there that Ruth wants to stay with Naomi. We see a little bit further down that Naomi then is so upset and frustrated with the situation that she is in that she renames herself to be Mara. And Mara is, I'm trying to see where it's at in here. It's more than what's just described in our Bibles. If we go back to the definition, to the Hebrew definition of what her name means, her Hebrew name Mara means deliberate, defiant, disobedient, bitterness, angry, fist-shaking, mad. She's not just a little bit upset. She's deliberately defiant. She's upset. She's mad. And yet she's still a respected woman, right? She's angry because she's now unattached. In that patriarchal society, she has become marginalized. She's on the edge, and she can't just come back. So as we talked a little bit earlier, she's lost her insurance. So she is out on her own with her daughter-in-law. Her land is gone. That went to the nearest male relative. She has a daughter-in-law who is willing to leave everything behind. And get this, her daughter-in-law knows that basically the only normal option for her is prostitution. That's all she has left to go on. But she wanted to be a part of something that Naomi has that they're heading into. She believes in Naomi. So we learn something more here. In Ruth chapter 2, it goes a little bit farther, and they head out, and Mara, or Naomi, sends Ruth out to glean, which means they're going to go collect grain in Boaz's field. And so they go out that way. If we go the next chapter back, we see in Ruth 3 and 4 that we're reminded that Ruth was marginalized in her family, and Boaz redeemed her as we get to looking through that. He took Ruth and Naomi, her mother-in-law, with her. He buys back their land, and let's say he paid about 100,000 shekels. So when they have a baby, that land goes back to the baby, and he has pretty much given away $100,000, essentially, that he has given to this family that he has redeemed. And he's done this to get her back into the family. That's how important that society and caring for others, that's how important that is. That's redemption. So Naomi, through that process, through Ruth, through that redemption, Naomi, who was previously defiant, deliberate, defiant, disobedient, bitterness, angry, fist-shaking, mad, Naomi now has meaning. She has purpose. She has land. She has a home. She has family. Redemption is something that God does to pay for our debt and our sin. But Boaz could redeem her and bring her back into community. Boaz recognized that he was called to be a redeemer, and if it cost him a fortune, it didn't matter. That was his obligation, and that's what he took on. If we look at Ruth 2, verse 20, it talks about, the Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and dead, she added. That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers. In other verses, you'll see that as guardian redeemer. And that is the legal term for one who has the obligation to redeem a relative who is in a difficult situation. As a side note, Boaz and Ruth were married. She did give him a son. His name was Obed. Boaz was the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David, and down we go, and we get to Jesus. So through that redemption, it continues to follow through into the promise of the Messiah. Boaz's job wasn't simply to pay her debts and get her a nice house, it was to get her back into community as a guardian redeemer. And if that isn't the ultimate goal of all ministry in the church as a whole, we've lost the idea of being God's partner in redemption. And we are to be bringing people to him, our guardian redeemer. So there's no sinner you're going to face whose debt hasn't been paid if they believe, but many have no father's house. They have God, our Father, wants them back. He aches to have them back. Living on their own without community breaks his heart, and he wants them back into community with him. So churches are good at writing checks and taking care of needs like that, but what do we do about our Ruth? What do we do about people like that in our community? God redeems by paying debts. The bondage to sin is covered by God through Jesus' death for our sins. And so at Love Inc., our job is really to be redeemers and to help the church be redeemers, to bring the lost back to our Father, and our job is not simply to feed the hungry. And I will go over a little bit about that in the past. There are times in Love Inc.'s life when we thought it was just paying bills and feeding people, and that's all it was about. And we're changing that. We want to get them back into community. God to be redemptive, and redemption means people end up with connections. So let's talk a little bit more about Love Inc. Am I off? Buzzing? It's okay. So Love Inc., and I've talked to some of you about this before, but Love Inc. stands for Love in the Name of Christ. I can go to one of the wired ones if that's easier. Okay, I'll see what magic JT works back there. Love Inc. stands for Love in the Name of Christ. So Inc., I-N-C, is in the name of Christ. Okay, it's not incorporated. I've seen that a lot where people say, Love Incorporated. No, it's Love in the Name of Christ. So what we do, we carry a big name to what we do. And as executive director of this ministry, I take it very seriously that what we do, we want to make sure that we are loving and that we are taking care of people in the name of Christ. So I take that very seriously. Love Inc. is a network of churches. So Marion has about 110 churches in Marion County. It's a lot of churches. And with those churches, about 29, 30 churches are considered partners of Love Inc. The Shepherd's Fellowship is a Love Inc. partner. What makes a church a partner is that you have, it's kind of cafeteria style. So financial support, Love Inc. does, or the Shepherd's Fellowship does support Love Inc. Volunteers we talk about Love Inc. in the church, and volunteers and people doing mission work come from the church. Other option in there is that you could have a gap ministry. And the Shepherd's Fellowship is starting a new gap ministry, which gap ministry just means there's a gap in something in the community, and this ministry is going to try to fill that gap. Pretty easy. I always thought it stood for something. It doesn't. So a gap ministry is simply, our new gap ministry that we're starting up is for cleaning supplies. And so we are doing a product drive right now. If you look out in the foyer when you come and go, there's a whole big table full of all kinds of cleaning supplies. And those are for people that are coming out of tough situations as a way to minister to them and begin conversations that could lead to redemption. And so you might see it as a bottle of Spick and Span. It's a connection. It's a link. And so that's what that cleaning supply ministry is to get people connected. It's a network of churches, and it's multiple denominations. So we agree to the Apostles' Creed, which is the root foundation of Christian belief. A lot of churches will recite that Apostles' Creed on a weekly basis. My church growing up, it was in the hymnal somewhere that we'd have to read it out because we hadn't had it memorized yet. But all churches that are part of Love Inc. agree to that Apostles' Creed as the root of our belief system. The nice part is we leave all the politics at the door. So we major in the majors, and we leave everything that makes us Baptist or Presbyterian, Catholic, non-denominational. We leave all of those other things at the door so that we work together as the body of Christ. We have a clearinghouse, and our clearinghouse is a phone ministry. And our phone ministry, we accept calls from either people are referred to us, they find our note up on a bulletin board somewhere, but people will reach out to us. And a lot of times the calls that we get are, I need my water bill paid, or I need food, or it's very basic things that are not so basic to people who are in the situations. And we use those as talking points to find out what the greater need is. If someone has a water bill that is super duper high, like literally $1,000 is not too uncommon for us to see a water bill that high. If you guys have water bills, that's really high. That's not a normal cost. So we look at that and we're like, something seems a little bit off here. What's going on? So we have an application process, and our volunteers will talk with people on the phone. We ask them questions. And it's not so much prodding and agency type work. I'm a person on the end of the phone that cares about you. How did you get into this situation? What's going on? And I'll share some of the stories that lead up to stuff like that in a little bit. But it's really to find out the story. We'll hear what your basic need is and put it up so that we make sure we don't lose sight of that. But we want to find out how we can help you and connect with you. So it is a phone ministry, and we do that because of the way our operation is set up physically. We do not have the volunteers and the space and all of that to take walk-ins and do applications in person and all of that. So we do ask for people to call in to us to get help. If that is something that anyone in this room is needing help through our clearinghouse, there's a flyer in your bulletin. Our number is at the bottom of that. There are also a bunch of clearinghouse cards and flyers and things out in the foyer that you can pick up on your way out, and our numbers are on there. We do take referrals, and we give referrals. So like our cleaning supply ministry, we may get a referral from Turning Point, from the homeless shelter, things like that, and we'll be able to know that that is a legitimate need. So we're helping our churches to be good stewards of their money, but we can also use that to help to minister to those people. So we do take referrals in. As we work through a case file with somebody, we also find out what their needs are. We do have a couple of emergency food pantries that we access. We have clothing closets. We have all sorts of things. We make sure that we are a central hub with the agencies in our community. We want to know about their programs. We want to know when they have funding, when they don't have funding, and to be able to be the best referral that we can. We do not want to send people on a wild goose chase, kind of like when you call people on voicemail and you go through all those prompts. That's what a lot of our neighbors go through. If you're running short on gas or you don't have minutes on your phone, you cannot afford to do that. So we need to be the best we can at giving resources to the community. We are building opportunities to seek the marginalized people in our town and to bring them into community in our churches. When I was hired at Love Inc. about 2.5 years ago, Love Inc. had reached a point where it had kind of plateaued and was being maintained. And Love Inc. National, we are a national organization. There's about 140 affiliates throughout the country. And Love Inc. National said, you know what? It's more than just about stuff. We need to really get involved and make this about people, make this about redemptive compassion. How can we work with people? How can we turn lives around? How can we transform lives? And so Love Inc. Marion is working hard to see how we can build those opportunities in so that we can be much more transformational in what we do. So what does marginalized people, what do they look like in Marion? So I want to share a little bit about that. these are some cases similar to what we've dealt with in our office just in the last couple of weeks. And so we recently had a young 20-year-old mother call us, and she has been raised by a drug-addicted grandmother and a drug-addicted mother. And before this young lady turned 18, somehow the electric bill or the water bill, the bill was put in her name before she was even old enough to have a bill in her name. They did not pay on the bill. And now this young lady has a baby of her own that she's trying to raise. She's trying to work. She's trying to take care. She has seen what her mom and her grandma have been through, and she knows that's not a lifestyle that she wants. And so she's off on her own, kind of like the sheep trying to do her own thing, but she's trying to do good, and she's feeling stuck. And so she called us about, it was an electric bill. She called us about an electric bill, was trying to move, and until that bill is paid off, she can't move. She can't get it turned off. She was about ready to get, not evicted, but to get her electric shut off because this bill that was in her name, they had stopped paying on. And so that's a case of someone that's trapped and marginalized in Marion. Because of all that was happening, she's having to drive 45 minutes out of town to stay at another family member's house to take care of her baby with no electric and all that. So she's driving back and forth. She now has more gas bills on her car that she has to pay for and all of that. Another situation, we recently had a couple that moved into Marion that were drug addicts, were drug dealers, and lived out of town, again, another direction, about 45 minutes away. And they moved to Marion because they wanted a clean start. They wanted to start up fresh, and in order to do that, they had learned that all these people they had surrounded themselves with in the drug culture, no one was there for them. They were loyal as all get out to their friends. If they needed something, they had their back, and when hard times fell on them, there was nobody around to help them. And they realized the situation, it kind of hit. They hit rock bottom, and it hit that they were in a bad spot. So they moved away from that entire environment. This is enough. The one lady is like my age, and she's wearing like size 10, 12 girl clothing. You realize when you're that bad off that something's got to change. That's what she told me. They were in Marion. They had brought their stuff with them, what they could carry, and an ex-con picked them up and said, I want to take you in. And this one gets me. The ex-con was someone that we helped in some of my first couple of months at Love Inc. And she said, I want you to call Love Inc. They'll help you. And she wanted to see this couple's lives turned around. She said, you do not want to go to jail. You don't want to go to prison. It's not a good place for you to be. You need to turn your life around. And she took these two strangers in, moved them into her house. She's not well off. She's a waitress. You know, she took them in. She's paying for these two people to live there. She went out. She bought them clothes at a yard sale that was going on. She bought extra food, everything she can do to love on this couple and take care of them. That's what marginalized looks like in our family, and that's what redemption starts to look like when you're taking people in. Another situation that we had recently, a grandma is working full-time, and her son stopped by and said, I can't take these guys. I can't take care of them anymore. And he handed off a baby and a couple of kids, and I can't do it. And grandma, again, is working full-time. She's iffy on how she's working right now, that if she misses too many days, she's going to get fired. She has 3 kids that she's in charge of now. She has to pay child care. Because she doesn't have full custody of the kids, she can't get help from Job and Family Services, from WIC, from all of those different things. She's in a tight spot. And so she's come to us and asked us for help to see what we can do to help her. So those are the type of things that we deal with. It pulls at your heart. But we know that we're not the ones to fix those situations. We're there to help along, and we direct them back to God. And our role as the guardian redeemer in the situation that we're in is to do everything in our power to love on them, to let them know their love, that they are in a bad situation, but they have value, there's worth. You guys have skills, you have talents, and you may have been in that pit for so long that you've forgotten what God has blessed you with. We want to speak that into their lives, and we want to connect them into churches that can continue to minister that. We're just the starting point. But we want to plug them back into churches, into families. Something as simple as a craft day that we had the other day at our church is something that we could invite some of our neighbors in Love Inc., we could invite them out to. When you're in a situation when you're trying to get away from the drug family and friends that you have, it's a bad influence, and that may be the only connection you have. But if there's something going on in a church, if there's something out in the community that has a body of Christ around it that we can plug people into, they can get positive influence. They know that people care about them and can start building friendships. Friendships lead to transformation. Relationships is how that happens. So in the past, just real quick, Love Inc. paid off debts. Not big debts by any means, but if you called and had an electric bill or a water bill or you needed gas money or something, that was primarily Love Inc.'s focus. And when we start focusing on money, it is so quick to forget about the person that's connected to that. And so Love Inc. National started to change where we are working, what our vision, what our mission is, and it's not just taking care of the immediate needs, but it is looking deeper and how else can we plug in and help. So again, in the past, we paid off a lot of debts. That's not really redeeming. It's part of redeeming. It's part of redemption, but that's not really what it's about. It's a quick transaction, and as soon as that's taken care of, the families are done. Thank you so much. We'll see you later. And they'll call you when they have another financial need. There's more to that. Funds go really quickly in our community. If you have a financial need, you can call Community Action, you can call Job and Family Services, Salvation Army, you can call all these different places to get funds. In Marion County, those funds dry up in about the first week of the month because there's such a huge need in Marion. And there's a situation where we've created a system of dependency, and in people that generation after generation, they have learned that I'm just in a rut, I'm just going to go and I'm going to get help. And it's okay. There are cases where it's an immediate, it's emergency, it's a thing like that. But when every single time, we have people that we've worked with since Love Inc. opened in 1991, and several times every year they are calling for financial assistance. And it breaks my heart because something is not right in your life when that is your lifestyle. When your lifestyle is having to stand in a food pantry, there's nothing wrong with standing in food pantry lines, anything like that. That's what they're for. But God has so much more for you than doing that. And that is so much stress on your life when you're having to look at where's my next meal coming from. And so we want to work with people. If we can do budget counseling, if we can do any kind of mentoring, if we can do anything to help people rise above that, we want to be able to do that. We don't want to enable, we don't want to do anything that's going to build a bad system and keep people held there. Love Inc. currently, we are actively working with churches in Marion County. We're actively seeking new partners to build ministries with. If you look in your bulletin, there is a half sheet in there with Love Inc. And if you'd pull that out for me, I want to go over these and just kind of explain what these things, what's going on. So we had a furniture ministry, the very top one there. We had a furniture ministry at Love Inc. called Hauling Hope, and we still have it, but it's on hold indefinitely. Our warehouse that we had been storing our furniture in, it was out at the old River Valley Middle School campus, and the fire department came in to do their inspections and said, no go. They condemned the building, and we lost our warehouse. That warehouse was a huge blessing to us. We literally paid about $200 per year for that warehouse. That's unheard of. And now with very, very meager budget at Love Inc., there's no way that we can find a warehouse of that size for $200 for the whole year. And so we are actively seeking someone who is generous and kind-hearted and wants a really good tax write-off. So we're looking at that, or trying to increase our budget for what we have so that we can pay more for rent. So right now, the furniture ministry is on hold. It was run and could be run again. It would be very easy to turn that back on and reopen it, but 3 churches partner on that. We accept donations of furniture, beds, tables, chairs, couches, recliners, all that stuff. We accept them from the community, clean them up, and then turn them back out to people that we have talked to through our clearinghouse and verified needs. So that is something that I would love to reopen. It's a huge gap in Marion County. It's a huge need. If you go down to the next section, we can very rarely help with financial support. We are asking our churches to invest in the ministry that is happening at Love Inc., and not necessarily to pay bills for people right now. If people are interested in paying bills, we will send them back to the church for the benevolence committee and take care of it that way. But to handle them through Love Inc. Internally is not using our resources well as far as staff and what we do. So we do have funding, limited funding each year that we've had. We've been blessed to get money from Council on Aging. And so anyone that's 60 and older, we do have very limited funds that can go towards those kind of bills and things. I want to get to the stuff I'm really excited about, stuff that we can offer. If you go down to that bottom part, these are the ministries that we actively have at Love Inc. right now. And as I mentioned, or maybe didn't, but we're very organic at Love Inc. We're constantly assessing what we have, what's working well, what we need, what we don't need anymore. If we find there are things we don't need, we'll discontinue that ministry and build something else. So it just depends on what our community, what the needs are. So we do offer 2 emergency food pantries. In the community in general, a lot of the food pantries, you have to wait until a certain date to be able to go, or you have to call ahead for an appointment, different things like that. And we have some families that, I talked to a family just a couple weeks ago. The mom insisted that she was okay on food, and I said, well, do you have food in your cupboards? Do you have refrigerator? Are you stocked up? Like, what do you have? She said, well, we have a couple of cans of ravioli, and we give them to the boys, or like 4 and 6 or something like that. We give them to the boys, and whatever's left, then my husband and I will eat. And that was having enough food for them. And so we hook them up with emergency food pantry. Said, you know what? There's more for you. And we sent them out to one of our churches that afternoon to get some more food until they could get to the next food pantry day and get them lined up. We offer gas vouchers on a limited basis. The Prospect Street United Methodist Church, they offer a certain amount of money every month. And those are for verified needs that are transportation to doctor's appointments out of town, or for your first day or 2 of work to get there, or whatever that we can do to help you before you get your paycheck. Again, limited funds, but that's something that they have offered. There's a laundry ministry that is in town now, and the laundry ministry is, right now, I think it's 1 Monday a month, and it's also through the Prospect Street United Methodist Church. And they do it all. They've got a laundromat that they work with. They schedule you for an appointment to go in, and you can go get your laundry done. They will feed the quarters into the machine for you, and you can hang out. You can handle all your laundry, whatever. They provide all the laundry detergent, and they provide prayer and Bible study while you're waiting for your clothes to get done. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful ministry. They are reaching a point where they're maxing out and overflowing on their dates that they have appointments, and they may be looking at extending that another day. And the neat part about Love Inc. is we are a network of churches. If that is a ministry that another church is passionate about, they can partner up together. You guys take Monday, we'll take Friday. However you want to do it, but it's a ministry that we can partner together, serving as the body of Christ. We have cleaning supplies that I talked about here. We have a diaper ministry through the First Presbyterian Church, and this is one that I love. This ministry is probably one of the oldest ministries at Love Inc., and it started... the sweet little old ladies in the church love their babies. And so they were really hurting for all the mamas out there that didn't have diapers, wipes, lotion, and all that stuff, and they've got a diaper ministry now. And so you can sign up through Love Inc. We will schedule you for a diaper appointment, and you get to meet those sweet little ladies when you go pick up your diapers and wipes and lotion. So another new ministry that started up this year, this is one of the things I love this about Love Inc. and serve with your passion. Serve where your heart is, whether that's you as a person or you as a church. The Lee Street Presbyterian Church came to me earlier this year, and they said, you know what? We've been asking our church, what do we do well? And they decided that what they do really well is care for people in time of need when they've had a loved one pass away. And the Lee Street Presbyterian Church, they go through us as a clearinghouse, and we immediately direct families out to them. For families that cannot afford funerals, the cost of burial, all of that stuff is a very unexpected expense that can come up real quick. And so their church is incredible. They'll pay for cremation. They will have a pastor at calling hours, at the funeral service, the graveside service. They will do all of that for you. Burial. They will have a dinner for the family at their church afterwards and love on them just as though you were one of their own church family members. And so that is a really neat one, the Ashes to Ashes funeral ministry. Minor home repairs and yard work and snow removal, those are some neat ones that have just sprouted up in the last several weeks. We have a mission serve group that was here in the summer that was kind of hosted through Trinity Baptist Church. And their coordinator talked to me a couple months ago and said, hey, we really liked what we did this summer, and we would love to see if that's something that maybe we could do year round. Is that something we could partner with you guys on, or how? Absolutely. And so they were having trouble identifying families in the community to go serve, and so we bring them through the clearinghouse and we identify ones that the church and this mission group, it's not just Trinity Baptist, but this mission group can serve. And so an example of that, I had a lady recently who called in about a roof leak and a furnace that needed replaced. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of work. And so the furnace had busted because the roof was leaking right onto it. All the electrical components, everything got ruined. And she found a way to get, I think through Job and Family Services or something, she found a way to get the furnace replaced. But the inspector came out and he says, we will not do it until your roof is fixed. And so we reached out to the Mission Serve group, and they're working on it right now, not on the roof, but on trying to get all the pieces in place, because it takes money, it takes people, it takes a good weather weekend to be able to do this. But so this woman is living with like space heaters and things like that until we can get that roof replaced. And so that's an opportunity. That's an area. If any of you want to serve in something like that, hit me up. And when they need the manpower and people to help with that, you don't have to be a super handyman. They will teach you along the way. But that's the type of thing. We had another group where a young lady, or an older lady, keeps an immaculate house. And she's reached a point where she can no longer clean the walls, the woodwork, the windows, different things. It's super easy cleaning, but she just can't do it anymore. We hooked her up with a youth group. And a mom and her teenage daughter went over and just blessed this woman and cleaned her house. And she was just beyond loved on while that happened. I have another woman who has gutters. The leaves are now filling her gutters, and she cannot. She's an older senior lady, can't do that herself. Is that something Love Inc. can help with? Sure. We've got a youth group that is happy to do that. As soon as we get that phone call, they're going to go out and help clean out her gutters for her. So simple things like that. We're always keeping an ear open for things that we can do. And it's in the actions, it's in that type of stuff where relationship happens, ministry happens, and we start loving on people and building them back and trying to bring them back into the flock, into the family, into the community of God. Okay? So those are some samples of that. So if you have other thoughts or things that you personally would be interested in, as far as ministries or things that you would like to bless someone with a card ministry, or you want to crochet blankets or whatever, let me know. Those are always things that we can talk about and see what we can work out. Love Inc. is working on changing our future. So not only are we working with these ministries that we have right now, but we're working on building what we're calling transformational ministry through different programs of educating people. So whether it's healthy eating or budget coaching, things like that, through those courses, there's mentorship that happens. Mentorship builds relationship. Relationship helps to transform lives. It builds those conversations. So that is where we're headed in the future. Opportunities for you with Love Inc., always accepting donations. We have product drives like the cleaning supply ministry, things like that. We may help with other churches' product drives here before too long. If you are ever interested in donating your time, we have a number of people in our church right now who are volunteering time or wanting to volunteer time that I haven't been able to reach out to yet. But we have people that come out and help in the office. We have people that come out and pray. We have people that help on the phones. We have people that help do data entry for us. It's a wonderful blessing for us. We cannot do Love Inc. without volunteers. It simply doesn't happen. I did put in the foyer some volunteer forms. And so if anyone is interested, just pick up one of those forms out there, fill it out, get it back to me, and we'll go from there and talk to you more about Love Inc. and get training and stuff like that started. So this morning I brought further info on Love Inc. We do want to connect you, and I hope sharing a little bit about that with the marginalized people in Marion, what that looks like, what redemption, a little bit better explanation of what that looks like. I hope that helps. So